The huge metal doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a deep sound that made everyone look up. Jake Martinez walked through those doors like he had done many times before, but today felt different. The air in the room was thick with the smell of different alien species and the sound of translators working hard to change words from one language to another. Jake was tired, but he did not show it on his face as he took his seat in the corner where humans always sat. The chamber was bigger than most cities back on Earth. The ceiling went up so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. Thousands of seats filled the space, and each one held a different kind of alien being. Some looked like giant bugs with too many arms and eyes that moved in ways that made humans feel sick. Others were made of light and gas and floated above their chairs, like colorful clouds. The oldest ones looked like rocks that had learned to think and move, but very slowly. Captain Lisa Harper sat next to Jake, and she was not happy. Her uniform was clean and her medals shined, but her face showed anger that she was trying to hide. She had been a soldier for 20 years and had fought in wars that most people never heard about. Today she felt like she was fighting a different kind of war and losing badly. The Xerion High Speaker Veltar stood up from his chair, which was made of some kind of crystal that changed colors when he moved. He was tall and thin like a tree. Bronze, and his skin was blue like deep ocean water. When he opened his mouth to speak, his voice came out like music, but the words he said were not beautiful at all. The human species continues to waste our time with their simple ideas, Veltar said, and his voice filled the whole chamber. They want us to work together to fight our enemies, but we already know how to do that. We have been doing it for thousands of years while humans were still living in caves and eating raw meat. Their proposal for joint defense is rejected like all their other proposals. Jake felt something cold move through his stomach, but he kept his face calm. He had heard words like this before, but today they felt sharper than usual. Around the chamber, other aliens were nodding their heads or making sounds that meant they agreed. The Quells made a noise like breaking glass when they were happy. The Netherians changed from blue gas to green gas, which meant yes. The ancient Kithara just sat there like big stones, but everyone knew they agreed too. Humans think they can teach us about war, said Chancellor Hixvam, who looked like a giant ant with too many teeth. But they have only been in space for 200 years. My species has been traveling between stars since before their sun was born. What can they possibly know that we do not already know better? More agreement sounds filled the air. Jake looked around and saw the same thing he always saw. Aliens who thought they were better than humans in every way. Aliens who acted like humans were children who needed to be told what to do and how to do it. Aliens who took human help when they needed it but never said thank you and never treated humans like equals. We have made another decision, Veltar continued, and now his voice sounded even more pleased with itself. Humans have been growing too fast and taking too many planets. They use resources like they think the galaxy belongs to them. From now on, humans can only live on 17 star systems, no more expansion. No more taking planets that should belong to older and wiser species. The chamber erupted in sounds of approval. Some aliens clapped with hands that had too many fingers. Others made clicking sounds with parts of their bodies that humans did not have. The gas aliens swirled around in happy patterns in the rock. Aliens glowed a little brighter, which was how they showed joy. Jake felt Captain Harper's hand tighten on the arm of her chair. He could see other human delegates around the room, and they all looked like they had been hit in the face with something hard. Dr. Amy Foster, who worked on medical research, was staring at her hands. Commander Pete Williams, who led human ships, was looking at the ceiling like he was asking for help from something that was not there. Is that your final decision? Jake asked, and his voice was so quiet that the translators had to work hard to make sure everyone could hear him. It is the will of the Council, Veltar replied, and he sounded like someone who had just won a game. The matter is closed and will not be discussed again. Humans will accept this decision because they have no choice. They need us more than we need them. Jake Martinez stood up slowly and gathered the papers he had brought with him. The papers contained plans for new weapons that could fight the mechanical enemies that had been attacking the outer edges of the galaxy. The papers had ideas for better ways to heal injuries and sickness. The papers had suggestions for trade routes that would make everyone richer and safer. But none of that mattered now. Captain Harper stood up too, and so did all the other humans. In the chamber, they did not say anything. They did not argue or complain or make threats. They just collected their things and walked toward the doors. The alien delegates barely noticed them leaving. They were already talking about other things like trade agreements and who would get which planets and how to split up the resources that humans would not be allowed to touch anymore. To them, the humans were just upset children who would get over it in a few days and come back asking for forgiveness. Jake Martinez walked through those same big metal doors, but this time he knew he would never walk through them again. Behind him, the sounds of alien voices grew quieter until he could not hear them at all. In front of him lay a future that none of them could imagine. 2 days after Jake Martinez walked out of the council chamber, something strange started happening across the galaxy. Human ships that had been sitting in alien ports for months or years suddenly started their engines and began to move. No one announced anything. No human official made any speeches or sent any messages. The ships just quietly lifted off from landing pads and flew away into space on the trading station. Kepler-7, a quell merchant named Crystalline Voice, had been working with human traders for 5 years. Every morning he would meet with Captain Roy Baker to discuss which goods to buy and sell. Roy always brought coffee in a metal cup that steamed in the cold air of the station. He would smile and ask about Crystalline Voice's family and share stories about his own children back on Earth, but that morning Roy did not come to their meeting. Crystalline Voice went to the human section of the station and found it empty. The shops were closed and the living quarters were dark. On Roy's desk he found a handwritten note that said, "Thank you for 5 good years of business. The contracts are complete and all debts are paid. Good luck with your future trades." The note was signed with Roy's name, but there was no explanation of where he had gone or why the same thing was happening everywhere. Dr. Amy Foster had been working on the medical research station Harmony Point for 3 years. She had been trying to find cures for diseases that affected multiple alien species. Her lab was always busy with experiments, and her computers were always running calculations that might save millions of lives. But when her alien coworkers came to work that morning, they found empty rooms and shut down equipment. The head of the station was a Netherian named Flowing Mist, who had always treated Amy with respect. Flowing Mist searched through Amy's office and found everything organized and labeled. All of Amy's research notes were still there. All of her experimental data was saved on storage devices that other scientists could use. There was even a detailed guide explaining how to continue the work she had been doing. But Amy herself was gone, and she had taken only her personal belongings. Commander Pete Williams had been leading human ships in joint patrols along the dangerous edge of the galaxy where mechanical enemies sometimes attacked peaceful worlds. His ships worked alongside alien fleets to keep trade routes safe and to rescue people when disasters happened. The alien commanders had grown used to seeing human ships respond quickly to emergency calls and fight bravely against overwhelming odds, but when Admiral Xerion of the Kithera tried to contact the human fleet for a routine patrol mission, he got no answer. His communication officer tried different frequencies and different codes, but every human ship remained silent. Finally, Pete Williams himself answered the call, but his voice sounded different than usual. "Admiral Xerion, this is Commander Williams," Pete said, and his words were formal and cold. "All human ships are returning to human territory. Our patrol contracts have been completed and will not be renewed. We wish you success in your future operations." "What do you mean completed?" Admiral Xerion asked. "We have agreements that last for 5 more years. You cannot simply leave without proper discussion and negotiation. Our legal advisors have reviewed all contracts," Pete replied. "The Council's decision to restrict human expansion has fundamentally changed the nature of our agreements. We are exercising our right to withdraw from partnerships that no longer serve mutual interests. This communication is ending now." The transmission cut off, and Admiral Xerion watched on his screens as dozens of human ships turned away from their patrol routes and jumped into hyperspace heading toward human space. In 30 years of military service, he had never seen anything like it. Armies retreated when they were defeated. They did not just quietly pack up and leave when everything seemed normal. The pattern repeated itself in every corner of the galaxy. Human engineers working on alien construction projects finished their current tasks and then submitted formal resignations. Human doctors treating alien patients made sure their cases were transferred to other doctors before quietly leaving. Human teachers in alien schools completed their lessons for the day and then informed their supervisors that they would not be returning. None of them seemed angry or upset. None of them demanded explanations or argued about the council's decisions. They were professional and polite and thorough in finishing their responsibilities. But they were also completely determined to leave, and nothing anyone said could change their minds. On the banking world of New Geneva Human, financial advisors had been managing investment portfolios for alien clients. These humans understood complicated economic systems and had been making their alien clients very wealthy through smart trading and careful planning. But when the markets opened that morning, the human offices were empty and all client accounts had been transferred to other firms with detailed notes explaining every transaction and recommendation. Merchant Captain Linda Torres had been running cargo shipments through dangerous parts of space for 8 years. Her ship was fast and her crew was brave, and they delivered goods to places that other traders would not risk visiting. But when her regular customers tried to book shipments, they found that her company had suspended all operations outside human territory. The aliens who had worked with these humans for years were confused and worried. They sent messages asking for explanations but got only polite automatic replies, saying that human operations were being reorganized and that all existing contracts would be honored until completion. There were no threats or demands. There were no angry speeches about the council's decisions. There was just silence and the gradual disappearance of humans from everything they had been doing. Some alien officials thought this was just a temporary protest that would end in a few days when humans realized how much they needed alien technology and protection. Others worried that something bigger was happening, but they could not understand what it might be. The council had made its decision about human expansion and humans had accepted it without argument. What more could they want? But as days passed and more human ships left alien space, a strange feeling began to grow among the alien populations. It was like when someone familiar stopped showing up to places where you expected to see them. At first you barely noticed, but then you started to realize that something important was missing from your daily routine. Trade routes that had always run smoothly started having problems. When human cargo ships stopped using them, medical facilities found that their most difficult cases were harder to solve without human doctors, who seemed to have a talent for finding creative solutions. Defense fleets discovered that their tactical planning sessions felt incomplete without human officers who often suggested strategies that no one else would think of. The humans were leaving wordlessly, but their absence was becoming louder every day. 3 months had passed since the humans left, and Admiral Xexhi was beginning to understand that something was very wrong. The mechanical enemies that everyone called Devourers had been quiet for almost 2 years, but now they were moving again. His sensors showed huge fleets of metal ships coming from the dark space between galaxies where nothing was supposed to live. The Devourers were not like other enemies. They did not want to conquer planets or steal resources or make slaves of other species. They just consumed everything they found and turned it into more copies of themselves. Planets became metal. Stars became fuel. Living beings became nothing at all. For 50 years, the combined fleets of the galaxy had managed to keep them away from populated systems, but that had been when human ships were part of the defense force. Admiral Xexhi stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the tactical display that showed the positions of all allied ships. Where there should have been 300 human vessels, there was now empty space. The humans had not just taken their ships when they left. They had taken their knowledge and their experience and their strange ability to think of solutions that no one else could imagine. Admiral, his communications officer said with worry in her voice, The Devourer fleet is much larger than our previous estimates. They have at least 2,000 ships, and they are moving toward the Xerion system. Xerion Prime was a mining colony with 4 million inhabitants. It was also the place where the galaxy got most of its rare metals that were needed to build advanced technology. If the Devourers consumed Xerion, the entire galactic economy would suffer for decades. "Send the attack order to all fleet commanders," Admiral HFY said. "We will engage the enemy at the edge of the Xerion system and stop them before they reach the planet." The battle began 6 hours later, and Admiral HFY knew within the first 10 minutes that they were going to lose. The Allied fleet had been designed to work with human ships providing cover and support, while alien vessels used their superior weapons and shielding. But without humans to coordinate the attack and respond quickly to changing conditions, the alien ships were fighting as separate groups instead of one unified force. The Quell ships had powerful energy weapons, but they were slow to change targets. The Netherian vessels could move very fast, but their weapons were weak. The Kythera ships, like Admiral HFY's own flagship, had excellent shields but limited firepower. In previous battles, human ships had filled the gaps between these different capabilities and created strategies that used everyone's strengths while hiding their weaknesses. Commander Kate Stevens had been the human tactical advisor who worked most closely with Admiral HFY. She had a talent for seeing patterns in chaotic situations and finding ways to turn disadvantages into advantages. During the last major battle against the Devourers 2 years ago, Kate had suggested a risky plan that involved using Quell ships as bait while Netherian ships attacked from unexpected angles. The plan had worked perfectly and saved an entire star system, but Kate was gone now, and no one else seemed able to think the way she had thought. The alien commanders were brave and experienced, but they all approached problems in predictable ways that the Devourers had learned to counter. Within 2 hours of fighting, the Allied fleet had lost 40 ships and accomplished nothing except making the Devourers slightly angry. "Admiral, we need to retreat," his tactical officer reported. "Our losses are too heavy and the enemy is not slowing down." Admiral HFY gave the order to withdraw and watched on his screens as the Devourer fleet continued toward Xerion Prime. The planet's defense forces fought bravely for 6 hours before being overwhelmed. By the end of the day, Xerion Prime was gone and 4 million people had died. The news of the defeat spread quickly through the galaxy and caused panic in many systems. The Devourers had been stopped before, but never so easily defeated the combined might of multiple species. Military experts tried to analyze what had gone wrong, but they could not find any mistakes in planning or execution. The alien fleets had fought exactly as they always fought. The problem was that their usual tactics no longer worked without human support. On the medical station, Harmony Point similar problems were becoming apparent. Dr. Amy Foster had left behind all her research and detailed instructions for continuing her work, but the alien doctors were discovering that following instructions was not the same as understanding the thinking behind them. Amy had been working on a cure for Zeldin fever, which affected 3 different species and killed thousands of people every year. The research notes showed exactly which experiments Amy had tried and what results she had achieved. They included precise formulas for new medicines and detailed charts showing how the disease affected different types of alien biology. But when the alien doctors tried to continue the work, they found themselves unable to make progress. Dr. Flowing Mist had been Amy's closest colleague and had watched her work for 3 years. He understood the science and could follow the procedures, but he could not replicate Amy's ability to make intuitive leaps that led to breakthrough discoveries. Amy had a way of looking at problems from angles that other doctors never considered, and making connections between seemingly unrelated facts. She would see patterns that we missed, Dr. Flowing Mist explained to his colleagues during a research meeting. When an experiment failed, she would not just try again with small changes. She would step back and ask completely different questions that led to completely new approaches. Without Amy's creative thinking, the research into Zeldin fever stalled, and people continued to die from a disease that had seemed close to being cured. Similar problems were occurring in laboratories across the galaxy where human scientists had been working on projects that alien researchers could not complete without their unique perspectives. The economic problems were becoming serious as well. Trade routes that had been profitable for decades were now losing money because human cargo ships no longer used them. The humans had been willing to take risks that other species avoided and to explore dangerous areas of space that others considered too costly to navigate. Captain Roy Baker had made regular runs through the Spiral Nebula carrying goods between 3 different star systems. The nebula was full of radiation and gravitational anomalies that could destroy ships, but Roy had learned to navigate through it safely, and his routes cut travel time by 40%. Other traders had tried to use the same paths, but none of them had. Roy's skill at reading the dangerous conditions inside the nebula, after 3 ships were lost trying to follow Roy's route, the Trade Consortium declared the nebula off-limits and established longer, safer paths that took twice as much time and cost twice as much money. The extra costs were passed on to consumers, and prices for many goods began to rise across the galaxy. But the most disturbing problem was that no one could contact the humans to ask for their help. Messages sent to human space were not answered. Diplomatic envoys were turned away at the border without explanation. It was as if humanity had decided that the rest of the galaxy no longer existed. High Speaker Veltar called an emergency session of the Council to discuss the growing crisis. "We need to reconsider our relationship with the human species," he announced to the assembled delegates. "Their absence is causing unexpected difficulties that require immediate attention." But even as he spoke the words, Veltar felt uncomfortable admitting that the supposedly inferior humans had been so important to galactic civilization. It was easier to believe that these problems were temporary and would solve themselves than to accept that the Council had made a serious mistake. 6 months after the humans disappeared from galactic society, the problems had grown from annoying inconveniences to serious threats that endangered entire civilizations. The Quell crystal merchants, who had always been among the wealthiest traders in the galaxy, were facing bankruptcy because their most profitable business had depended on human ships willing to carry dangerous cargo through risky areas of space. Crystalline Voice had built his fortune over 30 years by selling rare crystals that could only be mined from planets with extreme radiation levels. Most alien species could not survive on these worlds long enough to extract significant quantities of crystal, but humans seemed to have unusual resistance to radiation damage. Captain Roy Baker and dozens of other human traders had been willing to land on these deadly planets and collect crystals that were worth more than gold. The crystals were essential for building the fastest computers and the most powerful weapon systems. Without a steady supply from the radiation planets, the entire technology industry was starting to slow down. Crystalline Voice had tried to hire Netherian and Kithra traders to replace the humans, but none of them could survive the radiation long enough to make the trips profitable. "We are facing complete economic collapse," Crystalline Voice reported to the Galactic Trade Council. "Human traders were not just carrying our goods. They were the only ones capable of reaching the sources of our most valuable products. Without them, we cannot maintain our supply chains or our profit margins." The Trade Council had assumed that other species could easily replace human services, but they were discovering that humans had been doing jobs that no one else wanted or could do. Human cargo ships had carried toxic waste to disposal sites in dead solar systems. Human miners had worked in asteroid fields where the gravity was too unstable for alien equipment. Human engineers had built structures in environments that would kill most other species within hours. The Netherians were learning similar lessons about their atmospheric processors, which kept their gas giant colonies habitable. These massive machines had been built with a combination of sophisticated alien technology and simple human engineering principles. The alien parts were elegant and efficient, but they were also delicate and required perfect conditions to function properly. Dr. Amy Foster had worked with Netherian engineers to modify the processors so they could adapt to changing atmospheric conditions. She had added what she called backup systems that seemed crude and primitive compared to Netherian technology, but served as insurance when the advanced systems failed. The Netherians had tolerated these additions because Amy insisted they were necessary, but they had never really understood. Why? Now the atmospheric processors were breaking down and the Netherian colonies were becoming uninhabitable. The sophisticated control systems could not handle unexpected changes in gas pressure and temperature. When one component failed, the entire processor would shut down and millions of Netherian citizens would be forced to evacuate their homes. The human modifications were not just backups, Chief Engineer Flowing Current explained to his superiors. They were adaptive systems that could respond to problems we had not anticipated. Our technology assumes perfect conditions, but reality is never perfect. The humans understood this in ways that we did not. Flowing Current had tried to reverse engineer Amy's backup systems, but found that they worked on principles that seemed illogical to Netherian thinking. Where Netherian technology used precision and predictability, Amy's systems used flexibility and redundancy. They were designed to keep working even when everything else went wrong. Meanwhile, the military situation was becoming desperate. The Devourers had consumed 12 more star systems since their victory at Xerion Prime and showed no signs of slowing down. Admiral Xexhai had tried to adapt his tactics to compensate for the loss of human ships, but every battle ended in defeat or costly stalemate. The problem was not just the absence of human ships, but the absence of human thinking. Commander Kate Stevens had taught alien officers to approach warfare differently than they had been trained to do. Instead of following rigid battle plans, she had encouraged them to improvise and take calculated risks that could turn defeat into victory. Human tactics made no sense according to military doctrine, Admiral Dexa explained to the military council. They would divide their forces when conventional wisdom said to concentrate them. They would retreat when they should attack and attack when they should retreat. But somehow their unconventional methods worked better than our proven strategies. The alien commanders had tried to copy human tactics, but found that they could not think the way humans thought. Alien military doctrine was based on careful analysis and logical planning. Human military doctrine seemed to be based on intuition and willingness to try things that had never been attempted before. Chancellor Hixvam was receiving reports that made his compound eyes water with disbelief. Intelligence agents had managed to gather information about the human colonies that were supposedly restricted to 17 star systems. The reports showed that humans were not just surviving in isolation, but were thriving in ways that seemed impossible. The humans had apparently developed new technologies that were far in advance of anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their ships were faster and more maneuverable than the best alien vessels. Their weapons were more powerful and their shields were stronger. Most disturbing of all, their population was growing rapidly and they were expanding to new star systems despite the Council's restrictions. How is this possible? Hixvam demanded during a secret meeting with his top advisors. We cut them off from galactic trade and technology. They should be struggling to maintain their existing colonies, not building new ones. The intelligence report suggested that isolation had forced humans to become completely self-sufficient. Instead of relying on alien suppliers for advanced materials, they had learned to make everything themselves. Instead of buying alien technology, they had developed their own solutions that were often superior to what they had been purchasing. We assumed they needed us more than we needed them, his chief advisor explained. It appears that we were wrong. They have used their isolation as an opportunity to advance beyond anything we thought possible for such a young species. The most shocking discovery was that humans had apparently solved the problem of fighting Devourers. Intelligence reports from the border regions suggested that Devourer fleets had attempted to enter human space, but had been completely destroyed. No alien fleet had ever achieved such decisive victories against the mechanical enemies. High Speaker Veltar was facing pressure from every major species in the galaxy to restore relations with humanity. The economic collapse was affecting everyone, and the military defeats were creating panic in systems that had considered themselves safe from Devourer attacks. But every attempt to contact human leadership was met with silence or polite refusal. "We must offer them concessions," Veltar announced during an emergency council session. "Limited expansion rights, voting privileges on selected issues, perhaps even full membership in the inner council if they will agree to resume their previous activities." But the few messages that did get through to human space all received the same response. Humanity was no longer interested in participating in galactic civilization under any terms that the Council might offer. They had found their own path forward and had no intention of returning to their previous status as junior partners in an alliance that did not respect them. The galaxy was learning that some relationships once broken could not be repaired by simply offering better terms. Trust took years to build but could be destroyed in a single moment of arrogance and contempt. The Council had treated humans as inferiors for 2 centuries and now expected them to forget that treatment because the situation had changed. But humans had longer memories than the Council had realized, and they had used their time in exile to become something that the galaxy was not prepared to face. 1 year after the humans left galactic society, the crisis had become so severe that ancient beings who had never begged for anything in their 1,000-year lifespans were preparing to humble themselves before a species they had considered primitive children. Elder Prime Yothran of the Kithara was older than human civilization itself and had witnessed the rise and fall of dozens of galactic powers, but he had never seen anything like the collapse that was happening now. The Devourers had consumed 43 star systems and were accelerating their advance toward the core worlds where billions of people lived in cities that had stood for millennia. Every battle against the mechanical enemies ended in defeat because the alien fleets could not function effectively without human support. The tactical innovations and adaptive strategies that had kept the Devourers at bay for 50 years had all depended on human officers who were no longer available. Refugee ships filled with survivors from destroyed worlds were arriving at core system ports faster than they could be processed. Entire species were facing extinction, and the survivors told horrible stories of planets being stripped down to bare rock while their populations were consumed by mechanical mouths that turned living beings into raw materials for building more Devourer ships. The economic situation was equally catastrophic. Trade routes that had connected the galaxy for centuries were now too dangerous to use without human escorts, who had been willing to fight pirates and navigate through hazardous regions of space. Prices for basic goods had increased by 300%, and some essential medicines were completely unavailable because they could only be manufactured in facilities that humans had built and maintained on the medical station. Harmony Point Dr. Flowing Mist was watching patients die from diseases that should have been easily curable if Dr. Amy Foster had still been there to continue her research. The Zeldin fever epidemic had spread to 7 different species and was killing thousands of people every week. The alien doctors had Amy's research notes, but could not replicate her creative problem-solving methods that had led to breakthrough discoveries. "We are following her procedures exactly," Dr. Flowing Mist reported to the medical council. But procedures are not the same as understanding. Dr. Foster had an ability to see connections between different fields of study that allowed her to approach diseases from angles that we would never consider. Without that insight, we are just repeating experiments that lead nowhere. Similar problems were occurring in engineering projects across the galaxy. Human engineers had been involved in designing critical infrastructure on hundreds of worlds, and their systems were beginning to fail without proper maintenance. The humans had used design principles that seemed wasteful and inefficient to alien thinking but proved to be essential when unexpected problems arose. Power plants built with human input continued working when alien equivalents failed. Transportation networks designed by human engineers adapted to changing conditions, while purely alien systems broke down when faced with situations they had not been programmed to handle. Water treatment facilities that included human modifications continued producing clean water while alien facilities suffered cascading failures that left entire cities without safe drinking supplies. Elder Prime Yothran had lived through 3 previous galactic crises and had always found solutions through careful negotiation and compromise. But this crisis was different because the key to solving it lay with a species that no longer wished to participate in galactic affairs. The humans had not declared war or made demands or threatened anyone. They had simply withdrawn their cooperation, and that withdrawal was proving more devastating than any military conquest. "We must contact them directly," Yathron announced to the emergency council that had replaced the regular governing body. "I will personally travel to human space and negotiate a resolution to this crisis. The humans are reasonable beings, and they will listen to a proposal that addresses their legitimate concerns." But when Yathron's diplomatic ship reached the border of human space, it was met by a fleet that made the ancient being question everything he thought he knew about galactic power structures. The human ships were unlike anything in the Council's databases. They were sleek and graceful, but radiated power that could be felt even through heavy shielding. Their weapon systems were clearly far in advance of anything the galaxy had previously seen. Admiral Sam Clark commanded the border fleet from a flagship that was larger than most alien battle cruisers but moved with the speed and agility of a fighter craft. When he appeared on Yathron's communication screen, his uniform was crisp and professional, but his expression was completely uninterested in whatever the Elder Prime might have to say. "Elder Prime Yathron," Admiral Clark said with formal politeness that carried no warmth, "you are not welcome in human space. Please return to Council territory immediately." "Admiral Clark, I come as a representative of 67 species that are facing extinction," Yathron replied, and his mental voice carried the weight of desperate sincerity. "The Devourers are destroying everything we have built over thousands of years. We need human assistance to survive this crisis." "The Devourers are your problem now," Clark responded without hesitation. "The Council made it clear that humans were not wanted as equal partners in galactic defense. We have accepted that decision and withdrawn from galactic affairs completely." "We were wrong," Yathron said, and the words felt like poison in his ancient mind. "The Council made a mistake when we restricted human expansion and rejected human proposals. We are prepared to offer full membership with voting rights and unlimited expansion privileges, if you will help us fight the Devourers." Admiral Clark's expression did not change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "You called our technology primitive and our methods inefficient. You said we consumed resources wastefully and bred too quickly. You treated us like children who needed to be controlled and managed by wiser species. Now you discover that you need our primitive methods and inefficient technology to survive." "Yes," Yathron admitted, "we were arrogant and foolish. We failed to recognize the value of human contributions to galactic civilization. But millions of innocent people are dying because of our mistakes. Surely you will not punish them for the failures of their leaders." "We are not punishing anyone," Clark replied. "We are simply no longer participating in a system that treated us as inferior beings. You had centuries to recognize our contributions and treat us with respect. You chose instead to restrict our growth and reject our ideas. The consequences of those choices are not our responsibility." Yathron tried every diplomatic technique he had learned over 1,000 years of negotiation. He offered territory and resources and technology. He promised positions of leadership and guaranteed autonomy for human colonies. He appealed to human compassion and sense of justice. But Admiral Clark's response never changed. "Elder Prime, you seem to believe that this is a negotiation," Clark finally said when Yathron had exhausted his proposals. "But there is nothing you can offer that we want or need. We have spent the last year developing our own technology and expanding our own territory. We have solved problems that the Council could not solve and built systems that the Council could not build. We no longer require anything from galactic civilization." "But what about the humanitarian crisis?" Yathron pleaded. "Surely you feel some obligation to help innocent people who are suffering through no fault of their own." "We do help people," Clark replied. "Human ships provide humanitarian aid to refugee populations and evacuate civilians from worlds threatened by Devourer attacks. But we do this as an independent nation helping disaster victims, not as council members fulfilling treaty obligations. We choose who to help and when to help them based on our own judgments, not on requests from governments that spent 2 centuries treating us with contempt." The communication ended, and Yothran watched human ships escort his vessel back to the border. As his ship jumped into hyperspace toward Council territory, he realized that the galaxy had fundamentally changed in ways that could never be reversed. Humanity had not just left the Council. They had evolved beyond the need for the Council and become something that the older species were not equipped to understand or control. The humans were no longer asking for a seat at the table. They had built their own table, and the rest of the galaxy was discovering that their old table was collapsing without human support. 2 years after the humans left, the Galactic Council no longer existed as a functioning government. The great chamber where species had gathered for millennia to make decisions that affected billions of lives now stood empty except for automated systems that continued broadcasting emergency messages to anyone who might still be listening. The Devourers had consumed more than half the galaxy, and the mechanical swarm had mysteriously stopped its advance at the borders of human space, where it sat motionless like a vast metal wall separating the old galaxy from something new. Admiral Bill Norton stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiance and watched human cargo ships deliver supplies to refugee camps on one of the few remaining core worlds. The ships carried food and medicine and temporary shelter materials, but they also carried something more important, which was hope. The refugees who had lost everything when their worlds were consumed could see that someone still had the power to help them, even if that someone was no longer interested in joining their political systems. The human fleet had grown enormously. During the 2 years of isolation, new ships emerged from human shipyards every week, in each one incorporated technologies that seemed impossible according to everything the galaxy thought it knew about physics and engineering. Human vessels could travel faster than any alien ship and fight more effectively than entire alien fleets. More importantly, they were immune to the weapons that Devourers used to destroy other species. "Sir, another delegation from the former Council. Worlds is requesting permission to enter human space," Lieutenant Kate Ross reported from her communications station. "They claim to represent the survivors of 15 different species, and they want to discuss terms for a mutual defense agreement." Norton sighed and rubbed his temples where a headache was forming. These requests came every day now, and his answer was always the same. "Standard response, Lieutenant. We are no longer part of galactic politics. We provide humanitarian aid where needed, but we do not form political alliances with governments that we do not recognize." The irony was not lost on him or any other human who remembered the old days when they had begged for acceptance and respect from species that considered them primitive children. The Council had spent 2 centuries trying to keep humanity small and contained, but their restrictions had forced humans to become completely self-sufficient. In trying to limit human growth, they had eliminated human dependence on alien technology and trade. The refugees' camps that human ships supplied were full of aliens who told stories about the Golden Age when humans had kept the trade routes safe. And the medical stations running in the Outer Rim defended against mechanical enemies. They spoke about human engineers who could fix anything and human doctors who found cures for diseases that had puzzled alien scientists for generations. They remembered human traders who would risk their lives to deliver goods to dangerous places that other species avoided, but most of all they remembered human soldiers who fought bravely against overwhelming odds and never retreated when civilians needed protection. Commander Kate Stevens had become a legend among the survivors who had served with her. They told stories about her tactical brilliance and her refusal to abandon hopeless battles when lives were at stake. Her strategies were still studied by alien officers who tried desperately to understand how she had achieved victories that should have been impossible. The problem was that humans like Kate were gone now, and they were never coming back. The humans who remained in contact with galactic civilization were aid workers and humanitarian volunteers who helped refugees but did not get involved in military or political affairs. They were kind and professional, but they maintained careful distance from the aliens they assisted. Dr. Amy Foster had been replaced by Dr. Susan Wright, who ran mobile medical units that traveled between refugee camps providing emergency care. To disaster victims, Dr. Wright was competent and dedicated, but she worked for human organizations that answered to human authorities. When alien officials asked her to establish permanent research facilities or train alien doctors in human medical techniques, she politely explained that such decisions were beyond her authority. "We are here to save lives," Dr. Wright told refugee camp administrators who wanted more extensive assistance. "We provide emergency medical care and basic supplies, but we do not rebuild the infrastructure that your governments failed to maintain. That is your responsibility, not ours." Captain Roy Baker had been replaced by Captain Linda Torres, who commanded humanitarian supply ships but would not resume commercial trading relationships with alien businesses. When Crystalline Voice contacted her about purchasing rare crystals from radiation planets, she informed him that human companies no longer sold strategic materials to foreign governments. "We mine those crystals for our own industrial needs," Captain Torres explained. "We have no surplus available for export, and we do not accept payment in alien currencies or trade goods. If you want rare crystals, you will need to find alternative sources or develop the technology to mine them yourselves." The former Council worlds were discovering that humans had not just become independent, but had evolved into something that operated on completely different principles than the old galactic civilization, where the Council had been based on cooperation between species that needed each other for different resources and capabilities. The human empire was based on complete self-sufficiency and selective interaction with the outside world. High Speaker Veltar had become a refugee himself when the Zephyrian homeworld was consumed by Devourers. He lived in a camp that received regular supply drops from human ships, but the humans never stayed long enough for extended conversations. Sometimes he would see the same pilot multiple times, but they would not acknowledge previous meetings or engage in personal discussions. "They treat us like natural disaster victims," Veltar complained to other refugee leaders. "They provide food and shelter and medical care, but they do not see us as potential allies or trading partners. We are charity cases that they help out of moral obligation, not political calculation." The most frustrating aspect of the new situation was that humans clearly had solutions to all the problems that were destroying galactic civilization, but they would not share those solutions with anyone outside their own species. Human ships were immune to Devourer weapons, but they would not explain how they had developed that immunity. Human medical techniques could cure diseases that killed millions of aliens, but they would not teach those techniques to alien doctors. Elder Prime Yothran had survived the destruction of his homeworld and now lived on a human-protected refugee planet where he spent his days trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The ancient being had witnessed the rise and fall of many civilizations, but had never seen a species transform itself so completely in such a short time. "We created our own enemy," he told younger refugees who asked him to explain what had happened. "We treated humans like children who needed our guidance and protection. We never imagined that they might grow up and decide they no longer needed parents who did not respect them." The humans had not conquered the galaxy through military force or economic domination. They had simply stopped participating in the systems that held galactic civilization together, and those systems had collapsed without their support. They had been the foundation that everything else was built on, but they had also been invisible until they were gone. Now they were back, but on their own terms, as an independent power that helped when it chose to help and ignored everyone when it chose to be left alone. The galaxy had learned too late that some bridges once burned could never be rebuilt, and that respect once lost could never be restored through desperate apologies. The humans had left wordlessly, and in that silence the galaxy had discovered the true cost of arrogance. The lesson had come too late to save galactic civilization, but it would be remembered by the survivors for as long as their species managed to exist in the shadow of human power.